Hello, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the USGS National Climate Adaptation Science Center and the National Conservation Training Center. To introduce our panel speakers today, we have Elijah Johnson, who is the USGS National Climate Adaptation Science Center's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Accessibility, and Justice Coordinator, or DEIAJ Coordinator for short, on with us today. Welcome, Elijah. I wanted to welcome you to turn your camera on and unmute yourself, and I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, everyone. I'm Elijah, and I will be introducing our speakers for today. We're very grateful to have them participating in this webinar series. So the topic for today is skill sets and competencies integral to justice work. And our two speakers today are Legna Torres Garcia and Devon Parfait. Legna Torres Garcia joined the U.S. Geological Survey's St. Petersburg Coastal and Marine Science Center as a research oceanographer in 2020. Her work focuses on using multi-scale observational and numerical model data to understand the role of ocean circulation, waves, and sediment transport on coastal change. Her focus on both numerical model development and stakeholder engagement enables her to address community needs with the best available science. And Devon Parfait is the current chief of the Grand Caillou Dulac Band of Biloxi Chitimacha Choctaw and a 2022 graduate of Williams College, where he majored in geoscience. Devon currently has a position as coastal resilience analyst for the Environmental Defense Fund, working with the Mississippi River Delta Nonprofit Coalition as their science coordinator. He also serves as a board member of First Peoples Conservation Council, an organization of Native American tribes in the state of Louisiana, and serves as vice chair of the Native American Commission in the Governor's Office of Indian Affairs. Welcome and thank you, Legna and Devon. Legna, why don't you go ahead and come on camera?
Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Buenas tardes a todos and good afternoon. And thank you for having me today. My name is Legna Torres Garcia. My pronouns are ella, she, her. And today I will take you through a framework using a case study on reducing natural hazards and communication gaps through stakeholder engagement. But before I wanted to take you into our framework, the Caribbean region is prone to natural hazards. For example, this slide shows an example of Puerto Rico being vulnerable to two streams. In one hand, we have stream drought, and in the other one, we have stream flooding caused by hurricanes or even heavy rain events. In the right picture is an example of the infrastructure damage from Hurricane Fiona in 2022. I myself am from Puerto Rico, and I have been through both experiences. For example, in the case of drought, the map that you see to your left shows you events from the year of 2000 to the present. And you can see in the year of 2015 was a extreme case of drought. But that's not the only case. In 1996, actually, when I was a kid, I remember our water was rationed. And we will have to fill these buckets with water because we will only have water every other day for several hours. So I believe all this life experience shaped the life or my life and had a mark on my scientific path. In addition to this, coastal hazards such as coastal erosion are facing the island of Puerto Rico. So 60% of the beaches has been affected by erosion, for example. So in addition to this situation gets worsened when you have coastal impacts like the one the island faced during Hurricane Maria in 2017. So damage to the infrastructure remains, and you can see this in the bottom picture, still 4 years later in 2021. So the community was not able to safely access this area. So this is just a few examples of how vulnerable the island is and the capacity of the community to adapt for future hazards. But before I describe our process and the way we work with stakeholders to work on making resources more accessible and usable through our study case, I will take you to the beginning, and that starts when I finished my PhD in 2020. I had the opportunity to start a postdoc here at the Coastal Marine Science Center in St. Petersburg, Florida, as a research oceanographer. And I was going to work on combining fieldwork and numerical model to understand coastal hazards change in Puerto Rico, including the expansion of some resources that were available to the US, but not yet to Puerto Rico. Around the same time, there was a call for funding from the USGS Risk Community of Practice, which focused on how to close the gap of information between research and society. And that was the moment, in a way, that we could link both. How all the research that we were about to do and we were doing could be beneficial to the society. But first, before we enter into that, we have to lay a foundation. We have to lay a foundation on what are the coastal communities' priorities that could help us leverage the research that we were going to do and how this information could be accessible to the community. And so today I will take you through our journey from this framework, starting with our project plan. This represents the early stages or phases of the project, including that proposal development for that funding opportunity I just mentioned. Our main goal was to connect coastal marine research projects to communities in Puerto Rico through identify USGS resources. We wanted to connect with stakeholders in Puerto Rico, and we wanted to determine research priorities for the future USGS projects in Puerto Rico. And so from this phase, we learned when we developed the plan, we kept in mind the motivations from the previous slides I showed you, and we developed our objective, but we learned that, that we have to acknowledge that this project was meant to change and adapt to depending on the stakeholder priorities. But then the next step of the framework, we build our team to promote collaboration. And this is a crucial step for the success of the project because we'll build a transdisciplinary collaboration, including internal and external team members. So our team members comprise from USGS and external team members. We had team members from St. Petersburg, where I'm located, and also Woods Hole Coastal and Marine Science Center. We brought in, as part of our staff, a local project assistant. Externally, we have liaisons and partners from academia, the National Weather Service, the private sector, and local social science team that included a lead local facilitator and a Spanish-English educator. So what we learned from this is that this approach allows us to build trust and include local experts from the beginning that had a deep knowledge in the culture, history, and also they had a deep knowledge on stakeholder contacts as well. So the next phase of our framework is to connect. Once the team was built, we plan to connect internally and externally. Internally, we hosted joint meetings with principal investigators working on related topics. Externally, we contacted stakeholders from different sectors of the community, including we hosted meetings one-on-one. We also hosted virtual workshops with different sectors. We also had a roundtable discussions for potential future collaborations. And this part was added actually due to the challenge of COVID restrictions because we had to postpone an in-person workshop that we have planned initially. So I'm gonna walk you now through the internal and external connections. So internally, we had the opportunity of having 26 participants to learn about different projects within the USGS. This slide shows in the center the different participants' expertise, and in the outside, our overarching agenda. So they we wanted to foster potential collaborative relationships with research engaged in USGS hazards projects in Puerto Rico. And we wanted to document the USGS research being conducted in Puerto Rico related to natural hazards. And so, as I mentioned, we also learn from different topics. So this is an example of areas that we connected and learned about doing, that we're doing research in Puerto Rico. So this meeting was very important because it allows us to be aware of what we have in the USGS as a whole. So that allows us to provide this information when we go externally to the stakeholders. And so externally now, besides the one-on-one meetings and the roundtable discussions that I mentioned, we also have 5 virtual meetings. So we have stakeholders from various sectors that are indicated in the pie chart, and we try to select a variety of sectors for this engagement. So having local expert team, again, was crucial for this because they really help us to increase our database of contacts. And also we wanted to have different sectors to provide a more broad feedback and opinions about the resources and overall priorities. So this figure shows the meeting protocol. Again, in the center, it shows the participants' areas of expertise. And then in the external circle, you can see the protocol, including a facilitated discussion that was focused around 3 main topics that cover what relationship they had or have with the USGS, their feedback on current USGS resources that they have used, and what are their needs that an agency like the USGS could provide in the future. And at the end, to avoid any bias from the conversation and the discussion session, we then presented resources that the USGS was working towards expanding to Puerto Rico, as well as current resources across program that we learned from that internal meeting. So I think this is important because it provided to the participants information that perhaps they were not aware of. So at the end of all these interactions and meetings, the data gathered was transcribed and analyzed by the social science team. So for example, this slide shows the main recommendation topics by category of the importance. For example, the importance of non-technical language information. This includes all information needs to be in Spanish. Even though in Puerto Rico, people speak English, the best way and all information should be in Spanish. Also, the use of dashboards, resources that are easy to use, having information, for example, like pamphlets or infographic. For example, we have elderly communities that may not have access or are able to connect online. So having this information is crucial to keep communication between them. And also having raw data, including real time, is important for educators, for example, to teach the students and to train future professionals. So we understand that tackle everything at once can be complex, but having this information, again, lays the foundation and is useful for future plans or future research plans that we may have. So from these connection steps, we learned that building an internal network of experts is key and valuable to have connection with stakeholders. Again, learning what we had in-house in order to face and talk to externals was important. Other lessons learned was listening careful. We learned 80% is listening and 20% is talking, so that's very important. And understanding the historical and cultural context of the local community will allow to see the plans from a different lens as well. So the next step is design and dissemination. So internally design and redesign resources based on stakeholders' feedback. Debrief the internal USGS member on external engagement, so to keep them informed of what we're learning externally as well. And then externally improve and increase resources accessibility through a co-development process. So always remembering there's a feedback loop to connect with stakeholders to ensure products are meeting their priorities. For example, we have a stakeholder from Sea Grant that helped us a lot to ensure that we were moving in the right track, disseminating this information. And these are some examples of some of the resources that we have created. Our first step, which reflects the finding from our workshops with stakeholders, was the need for data and resources to be more accessible. So we use this information we learned by the internal meeting. That was really important, internal meeting connections and collaborations. We created a website where USGS resources in Puerto Rico can be found in one place. We're very excited about this bilingual effort. When you navigate, it will bring you to the main page on Puerto Rico hazards. And from this, you can access information on other topics such as landslide, hurricanes, earthquakes, water resources, coastal tsunamis, and ecosystem and environmental contaminants. So I want to thank all the scientists and all the liaisons that help us to get this and through the review process. And I know it's hard to measure success, and this by no means means that we are measuring success through this, but I think it's a good way to see how the access to the page relates to episodes or things that happen. So if you see in the figure in the panel A, we went back to the stakeholders and we shared the page once it was done, and you can see a pic there. And then we have a media news release, so you can see a pic there as well, an A. And then we went to the field work. We did field work. I do coastal work. We had local news interviews in Spanish. So you can see in panel B a peek on coastal page. Again, I do coastal work. And then on the panel C, you can see that during Hurricane Fiona, we had a huge peak on the hurricane page as well. Again, so this allows us to correlate access with the page with different events as well. And so another outcome we created and finding from our finding was user-friendly products. So we created an English and Spanish accessible to the community and for outreach purposes in collaboration with Woods Hole. This is a story map. This resource shows shoreline change in Puerto Rico, and it also includes an interactive map, which is good because the map is linked from another resource that can be a little bit more technical. So in this way, they can zoom in to specific municipalities and see shoreline change. They also learn about hurricane impacts information. They also end on a positive effort on coastal protection. And it also ends on a video that we also translate into Spanish. So it's a more user-friendly way to learn about shoreline change. And so from this stage, we learn to ensure that the outcomes are seamless. And I know that I've been talking about internal and external engagement, but in the end, the outcomes should reflect everything that we have learned, all the feedback and all the information in a seamless way. So the outcome, basically they don't know like the internal or the external steps. And also embrace humility. I think humility will allow us to get the best possible outcome forward. So I think those are very important. And then the last final step is grow capacity. The end goal is to develop user-friendly resources in Spanish and English to increase access. We wanted to identify knowledge gaps that future USGS research can be addressed. We also want to apply this framework in other projects when it's possible. There's still more to do, and this is part of a feedback loop where more planning happens, and then we start the whole process again. From the terms of partnerships, I think through this process, a lot of partnerships have emerged. So this is grow capacity, and this includes important via each of these partnerships, we leverage their expertise, and it allows us to learn from their connections and their knowledge. So each of these partnerships had a specific connection with communities. And because we are partnering and collaborating with them, we're also learning and gathering the knowledge as well from different areas. And so I think overall lesson and all the rest follows under this umbrella of building trust. I think every lesson that we learn falls into this. Following through with stakeholders is imperative. I understand of the stakeholder burden, but also it's important that you let them know about the process because you are taking their time through this process as well. So they care and they're interested in learning more and through the process. Embracing your lived experience allows you to be more connected with the process. be mindful of the local language. In this case, even though in Puerto Rico, again, some people speak English, there's nothing like talking in your first language, and that comes from me as well. And be patient. This process takes time, but it has a huge payoff. And I just want to go through quickly with, I think, success stories. As I mentioned, part of my postdoc was deploy real-time oceanographic instrumentation. So because of stakeholder engagement, we did have the opportunity to interact with Fishermen Association and a community leader in charge of reef restoration and water quality monitoring. So because of the design of the stakeholder engagement framework, we were able to design web pages that they could access the information of wave and winds before they go fishing. They can see the water temperature for their monitoring. So perhaps we would have not done this web page before, but because we were very mindful of the community, then we created this web page for them as well. We also were able to secure funding and currently are working on interviews with community leaders because we want to get their feedback on resources that we're expanding for the island on stream storm events. And we are also coordinating an in-person workshop finally happening hopefully in August, again, to keep getting feedback. And then thanks to supplemental funding, we're able to grow capacity on the island, which is the goal, through cooperative agreement with University of Puerto Rico at Rio Piedras and Maya West. We're able to fund graduate students and professors to work on shoreline change on the island and to work on the influence of coral reef on coastal protection. And we also have a 5-year agreement with the local social science team to continue this work further because we're not done yet. There's more to do. And with that, muchas gracias. Thank you everybody for your time. And I really appreciate it. If you have any questions or inquiries, that's my information. Thank you.
Thank you, Legna, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you for the questions that are coming in. We will get to those questions in the Q&A portion of this webinar. Next, I will invite Chief Devon to, there you are, to begin your presentation when you're ready. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Wow. Thank you so much, Legna, for your amazing presentation. I'm still processing all of that really great information. And thank you, Elijah, for the introduction earlier. I'm really thankful to have the opportunity to share what I've learned from my life experience and to share some of my life, and really honored to have that uplifted in this space. So I'm not going to be showing any slides today. I know I get tired of slide presentations sometimes, and it just can kind of all blur together. Don't get me wrong, I love slide presentations. I use them all the time. But today I'm just going to talk to you with my voice and my hands to hammer down on some of the points that I'm going to make around just being human and communicating with each other. So to begin, one of the first skills that I think is integral to justice work is the ability to communicate and to storytell, to connect with others, not just intellectually, but also emotionally. There is a heavy emphasis on empirical results, but earth science is inherently very human. You cannot remove people from place. So I'm going to tell you my story and how I got to be in a position of combining Western science training with my indigenous roots as a coastal restoration scientist. So I'm from Louisiana, which maybe is most known for the city of New Orleans and seafood, but also its rich culture and history. We live on a delta, and this delta was built by the Mississippi River and all of the sediment coming down from the tributaries that reach all across the continent. It's relatively young and only about 7,000 years old, give or take 1,000. And it culminates into this large delta region that my tribal community and other tribal communities live on now. It was inhabited originally by the Chitimacha, with Chawasha and Washat to the east. And there was also, during the Trail of Tears and during the colonization, other communities were forcibly pushed down into the southern parts of the delta. The reason why my tribal name is so long is because of the geographic location, the Grand Caillou Dulac band, but also Biloxi, Chitimacha, and Choctaw. And the Biloxi and Choctaw were forcibly pushed down. And so these communities lived from the Delta. Their lifeways intimately connected to the land and waters that provided resources needed for life that Mother Nature provides for free. No subscription fee. It's provided for you. And over the years, the colonization throughout the state, early trade with Native Americans is what built up the local economy until the ultimate shift to industrial agriculture and eventually extraction of oil and gas. Following that is decades of development around the coast. This development and extraction, as well as the leveeing off of the Mississippi, fundamentally changed that environment. The clean and fertile waters that once supported the communities have now become polluted and are at risk of being lost to the Gulf. Native communities were also intentionally prevented from gaining access to any education past the 7th and 8th grades. And now we're in a crisis where our communities can no longer make a living from the lands that once supported them, with little options for economic mobility and the constant threat of hurricanes and the increasing intensity of hurricanes as climate change continues to be a threat multiplier. For the first 7 years of my life, I lived right along a bayou. My grandpa owned a shrimp boat. We used to go out and trawl. I used to be able to fish off the dock with worms that my grandpa raised in his own worm bed. And then we would also catch crabs by the dock with the unused fish heads. I had a relationship with the water and to my family. However, in 2005, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita had hit Louisiana. Katrina was devastating in many ways, and lots of people ended up having to move all across the state, which ended up having a housing crisis. And for Rita, although Rita hit a little bit more west, that storm surge really came in to the south and stayed for a long time. I remember when I was younger, I ended up going back to the house, and my prized possession at the time was my zoo books. I don't know if anybody remembers zoo books, but it was kind of a subscription thing that you can have where you get a magazine with animals that had anatomic structures and all kinds of great information and pictures. And I remember going back and just seeing my zoo books on the bottom shelf full of mold, along with the walls and everything. We couldn't salvage the home. So we ended up moving when I was in 2nd grade. We moved about maybe 2 to 3 hours north. We lived with my nanny at the time, who was a family member, and we stayed with them for about a year trying to find a place to live. It was really difficult, and my grandpa was driving a little bit further up north from Lacombe, and he just so happened to see somebody nailing in a for sale sign as he was driving past. So we got lucky, and I ended up staying in a very rural town for a little while, and then ended up moving back moving to the West Bank, which is just south of New Orleans. And I moved around there for a couple times until I ended up where I am now, living with my family on the West Bank. Although I would frequently visit back down south to visit my family and my community, we'd often take trips, go visit, spend some time. And one of these visits was my first introduction to learning more deeply about the issues that we face from now Elder Chief Sherelle, with her who was the chief before me, and now I'm the current chief of the tribe. And we talked for hours about anything and everything. And by the end of it, I just asked, how can I help? And what can I do? And not too long after that, I was asked if I wanted to be the future chief of the tribe at 12 years old. I felt honored and so privileged and accepted that title, knowing that the position was for the good of my family, my community down south. And so while I knew who I was going to be, I never really knew how I was going to be it. I was not an academic student whatsoever. In fact, I completely failed my first year of high school. I didn't even pass gym class. And for gym class, all you have to do is dress up and get your grade. And I didn't even do that. Eventually, as time went on, people were telling me that college is important. You should get your grades up. And I said, okay, I'll do that. So I got better grades, but I also realized that I could get by just doing my classwork and skipping the homework. So that was kind of how I went through my high school experience. So after failing to get into college because of my less than stellar background, I decided to go into community college to do general studies until I had some direction. Generally, my grades were decent, but it wasn't anything stellar, B's and C's. There were a few classes that engaged me. Notably, it was actually a physics and a math class, funny enough, For the physics class, I like to say that I learned more from my high school than I did. I'm sorry, that I learned more from YouTube than I did my high school. And one of the things that I liked learning about was space. And my professor at the time, my physics professor, also liked to talk about space and learn about space. So after every class, we would get together and we would just like talk for 5 minutes just about space and go back and forth. So I was really engaged with the class, and it felt great to have that connection. I also had a math class that I did well in, and the format just worked. It was online and it was step by step, and it just worked for me. And it was the first time that I'd ever been asked to be a tutor. And that just really shocked me because, like I said, I was not somebody who was academic, and being asked to be a tutor was like this, like, whoa, me? Like out of everybody? So I had a couple good experiences in college, but still just kind of normal grades. And at the time, I was trying to think about what my direction could be. I was trying to chase a job for the money. You know, I was trying to think of what job will give me the most money that it can, and also be aligned with my interests in some way. Because I really didn't see at that time how education would be relevant to anything regarding me being chief. So while I was in community college, I got the opportunity to go up to a conference. It was a geology conference for the Geological Society of America. There was a woman named Rona Cox, who was a Williams Geoscience professor, who would often come down to Louisiana with, I like to call it a study abroad domestic program. It's called Williams Mystic, and it's an offshoot of Williams College. And they look at the coast and the oceans through an interdisciplinary lens, and they travel on the West Coast. You do a field seminar out in the ocean, and you go down to the Gulf Coast, and they would talk to my elder chief. And so she was getting ready to present at GSA about the plights of Southern natives. And she had asked if there could be a tribal member present to just be there and be present for the conversation. And so me and my brother ended up going there. And, you know, Rona at the time, she didn't think that we would engage with the conference at all. She thought maybe we'd be there for the presentation. And I was really surprised to go to this science conference and not see tables full of beakers or scientists in lab coats everywhere. I mean, that was my perception of what science was: beakers and lab coats, and nothing outside of that. And I was really pleasantly surprised to learn that there was a lot of passion and intent. And I went to see some presentations, and I mean, some of them kind of just went over my head, but some of them were really accessible, and I really learned some things that I otherwise wouldn't have in any other context. And it was great. And she saw how engaged I was, and she asked me if I wanted to go on stage and say something and speak a little bit on behalf of my community. And I was a little nervous, but I said, yeah, I would love to do that. And I went on stage, and I remember we even sat at the table outside and we were crafting what I could say. And I gave my speech, and it was so well received, and people were coming up to me after, offering help, connection. Here's my business card, you know, here's what I do, here's how I might be able to help with this in some way. And it was the first time that I ever felt like I had real power in my voice, that my voice was a tool that can be leveraged to help get resources to the community that was needed. And so at the end of the conference, Rona was reimbursing the students who were there from Williams along with me for their expenses. And she asked me if I wanted to try and get into Williams. I was going to community college. My plan was always to try and transfer into another university. I looked into it. It's a college that is really prestigious. It's only about 2,000 people, and the transfer acceptance rate was only 2%. So very, very small percentage of getting in. And it seemed like a very elite college with lots of money and resources, something that people work all their lives to get into. So we just decided to go for it. I said, yeah. She said, the first thing you need to do is raise your grades up. I said, okay, I can also retake the ACT test and try and get a higher score, because I had only consistently gotten about a 22 or so. So then I raised my grades up. I did better in school. I ended up finishing my community college semester off with all A's. I went to a library for the first time in my life with an ACT book, and actually sat down at the library and studied from page to page to learn how to take the ACT. I scored sometimes 10, 11 points higher than I had before. And it was a really significant bump in my test score to go along with my grades, and then also the recommendation letters from my chief, from Rona, and the other two professors that I had done well in their classes. We were waiting to hear back. I was rolling ice cream at the time, so I was rolling ice cream and I got a phone call. And I said, I'm so sorry. This is a really important phone call. My colleague is going to wrap up your ice cream just like you want. They were really understanding. And I went back and Rona told me that she had heard from admissions that I had not gotten in and that I'll get an official email. And I was kind of like, okay, I expected that. It was a good shot to take. But she was also like, I'll think of some ways that we might be able to adjust and do something different. And so she ended up saying that I could do this Williams Mystic program, the one that would travel and come down back to Louisiana. And I did Williams Mystic. I applied for it and got in on a full scholarship. It was about $40-something thousand for one semester, and I got in completely for free. There was also a lot of support in the program. I remember the policy professor, me just trying to read that policy felt like alien language when I first started reading it. And so I was trying to communicate to the professor that I'm really struggling to understand and read this. And every week she gave me 7 guiding questions to help me learn what I need to take from the reading, what I should be focusing on, and things that I might be able to talk about in class. And so the support that I had there in the program was basically like a trampoline. You know, I was here and they bounced me on the trampoline and I went flying up. It was the first time that I did original research looking at coastal land loss, actually measuring the physical coast, seeing what it means for saltwater cordgrass to be there and mussels to help protect the coast. What happens if they're not there? What does the physical process look like? All of those things. And so it was a really fruitful and incredible experience that was guided through the mentorship of Rona. Eventually, I did that, got my grades, but it was still a couple months before admissions time. And this was in the fall. So I was trying to think about what we could do for spring. And she said, we kind of went back and forth on a couple things, but what ended up happening was I got to campus. She was going on sabbatical. So she said, well, I'm leaving for the week. My husband only comes back on the weekends. I need somebody to take care of my guinea pigs during the week. So if you take care of my guinea pigs, I'll help set you up with classes. And she did. I stayed at her house. She even put me on her son's car insurance so that I had a car to go back and forth from the house and the campus. She talked with the geoscience professors there, with another Native American professor named Eli, and got set up with 4 classes to just audit and maybe get a recommendation letter at some point throughout that process. She also got me set up with a meal plan, and she got me friends. There was somebody who was from Louisiana who was around there, and we ended up becoming really close friends and taking me around campus, and I got to be there. And so whenever I went through those classes, I got my recommendation letters and officially reapplied to Williams, and they officially accepted me, and I got in finally. And that's where I spent 4 years doing research. And the research that we ended up doing was about land loss in Louisiana. So I knew from visiting and talking to family and to people in the communities that we were experiencing land loss at higher rates than the rest of the coast. At least it seemed that way from what you can see visibly erode. But no one, despite all of the work that had been done in coastal Louisiana, no one had ever done any work to look at how land loss was affecting the communities and the tribal communities there. So for 4 years, that's what I did. I worked with satellite images, and I did a land loss analysis for my community and 2 others in the region to finally get the quantitative data to advocate effectively for the community. It was an opportunity for me to connect that academic education to my Indigenous roots. It was something that I never even thought was possible, but once I started doing that final project in that class where I was auditing, I actually took a mastering GIS class where I worked with the satellite images to start the whole process. I thought, wow, this is where I need to be. I can be here all the way in Massachusetts, 1,500 miles away from Louisiana, and still contribute back to my community, which was kind of the sacrifice that I had to make. You know, at that point, I was making a decision whether or not I wanted to try and transfer into a college and leave Louisiana and try and chase opportunity, or stay more in the community and do more community work. And so it was kind of the best of both worlds for me. I could get my education and also contribute back to my community. And now I've been working, I ended up graduating in 2022. After I graduated, I officially came into my role as chief. We had a small ceremony because it was still COVID times. So I signed the paper. I had my eagle feather next to me. I gave my speech, and my elder chief also talked for a little bit, and it became official. Throughout that time, during my semester, I also applied for the Environmental Defense Fund as a coastal resilience analyst to science coordinate the coalition that they have in Louisiana to help contribute to that. And they accepted me, and I got that full-time job. And now I've been working with tribal leaders throughout the state within grants as well as officially through the state. And I'm also involved in coastal restoration work, coordinating science within my coalition of nonprofit organizations and bringing in both an Indigenous perspective and a Western science perspective. And bringing in, we'll bring in the Indigenous perspective in Western science spaces and Western science in the Indigenous knowledge spaces to help co-create some of that knowledge. And so through the context of this story, there are several lessons that I have learned that I think would be really great to share with you all. Number one, the reason that I wanted to share my story is to show how important mentorship is. Not even just the traditional mentorship where you file an application and you go through the process and you get it, but just finding the ways that work. You know, I fed Rona's guinea pigs and she got me set up with classes. I don't know how equal that setup is, but she made it work. And not just for the one project that you might be working on, but also increasing the capacity of the community that you're working with. If Rona had not taken the initiative to work with me and intentionally teach me, I would not be in the position that I'm in now in my ability to offer more capacity to my community and the broader scientific community to get more good work done. Number two is the relationship building with those that you're working with. In science, especially social science, humans are considered subjects to be studied. Instead, we should be moving towards a model of intentional collaboration in which varying ways of knowing, like Western science, Indigenous knowledge, can coexist and inform each other to make better, more context-specific, holistic decisions. Number three is related to number two, and it's really just simply empathy and understanding. We as scientists are often taught that we have to remove our emotions from the issue to be as non-biased as possible. But science is inherently unbiased. I mean, you choose the discipline that you want to go in based on your own bias and what you want to work on and be a part of. That's not to say that it's not helpful depending on the situation, but some of the best work I've seen comes from those who feel a personal stake in the work and develop a relationship and connection to community members that can often last a lifetime, with the work compounding into more positives and more positives for the community and more justice overall. I'd also say that in justice work, the most important timeline is not about the science. It's about the community and the community's priorities. So my last one, number four, is having the ability to adapt. Sometimes we can get so caught up in the results and goal and timeline, but when you begin a project, sometimes your original question changes based on the data you find. And it's either necessary to shift or you have to have some frank conversations and need to adjust and change. The point of justice work is not to meet the written expectations in the beginning, but to do the work necessary to truly bring justice to the forefront. And now, as we transition, hopefully, from an extractive philosophy-based society back to a more regenerative one, we have to acknowledge the relationships we have, not only with each other, but also with our planet and other living beings. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening and taking the time to be with me in this space. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Chief Devon, and thank you, Legna, for those presentations. We're now going to transition to the Q&A portion of this webinar, and I'll invite Cielo Sharkis to come on screen. Cielo Sharkis is Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Accessibility, and Justice, or DEIAJ, coordinator with the National CASC. So Cielo, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Legna and Chief Devon for coming on today to share with us your wisdom and insight. We are all really appreciative and loving what you have to say for us today. All right, the next question we had for Chief Devon was, thank you so much for your great narrative on your social positionality and tribal life experiences. We had a listener who described themselves as being a non-tribal early career researcher doing qualitative research on traditional ecological knowledge and climate change adaptation in the Northern Great Plains. For a non-tribal researcher, working with tribal nations would be challenging sometimes due to a lack of prior knowledge on tribal culture, lifeways, and languages. What are your best suggestions for a non-tribal early career researcher if they want to conduct qualitative research on climate change adaptation based on traditional ecological knowledge? And thank you again, They Described, for the vibrant narrative.
Great. Thank you so much for those comments. My biggest suggestion would be to find time and money and resources to just spend time with the community as much as you can. One of the things that I think has helped contribute to my knowledge base is just spending time with our tribal leaders, with our elders, learning from them, asking questions. It was really interesting because there was a situation where there is somebody who grew up in a native village. They were not native genetically, but they grew up in the culture and as part of it. And there was a lot of contention about whether or not they should be involved in things. And that, to me, brought up a really interesting question around if you have somebody who grew up in the culture, grew up with the elders, knows the issues, knows the environment, do they have, does somebody who has like a blood connection to it, even though they may not know any of the issues or be connected, have more of a right than somebody who grew up and was part of it and part of the work. And part of that is just spending that time learning as much as you can, and helping to bring in more knowledge and talk about it. Yeah, that would be my suggestion, is just spend as much time with the elders as you can, especially while we have them. Thank you for that question and those comments. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chief Devon. So for Legna, we have one question. What kind of leadership structure did you employ during your initial internal meetings with all of your diverse participants?
Thank you for the question. If I understand correctly, the way that we did the internal is we have one-on-one meetings, we have emails through our center requesting researchers or staff that have worked in Puerto Rico before. And then from there, we kept building a database. We also have support from the center, where again, like allow us to get contacts. And then from there, we had emails with different programs across the agency that pinpoint a liaison to a representative for that specific topic or a specific contact. And that way we can organize the meeting. And those were our point of contact when it comes to a specific topic to keep track among ourselves and the project. I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Legna. We have a follow-up question to that question. So how were local community member priorities on topic areas incorporated? From the results slides, it looks like the focus was on the mechanisms of sharing information and not necessarily on the topics the materials were addressing.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And to answer that, we were laying this foundation of different, getting the feedback on those three main topics that I mentioned before. And what we did is, from our findings, the main finding was that people had trouble accessing information for Puerto Rico in the USGS. So we decided that was going to be the priority because we have those liaisons that we could make this page to provide that information. But also, we also learned that they wanted user-friendly information on shoreline, for example. So that brought us to create that story map, which I call it like a virtual magazine, taking into account their information and their feedback on the type of topics that they wanted to see in that particular project. But I just wanted to add that for this second phase, we are now using what other topics they wanted to see to create our future plans of research and fill in those gaps where we do not currently have the information available. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that answer. So we have a question for both of you. Can you comment on the importance and the role of personal storytelling in STEM education and science communication?
You, thank you. I think storytelling is a key because it makes you approachable and it makes it personal. And I think that's a key. And I'm from Puerto Rico, so no better than our life experience and our heart and our passion and our storytelling that can link us with that community. And I think that actually helps to build that trust that takes sometimes a long time. So I think storytelling is a way to make you human, if that makes sense, and to make you equal with whoever you are communicating with. And I let Devon continue.
Yeah, and I think it's important to inspire people too. You know, in STEM, sometimes a lot of things are just, you know, process. You're in the weeds, in the literature, and sometimes I don't know, it feels very blocky. So having somebody who brings a little bit of narrative and storytelling and a little bit of inspiration to the work can help others be inspired to do more, can bring more people in, and just establishes that emotional connection that we need as humans. You know, we are inherently emotional, loving beings. So finding ways to connect to the work emotionally and not just intellectually, although it's both. Uh, yeah, just inspire, tell some stories, and get people excited. I think that does wonders in many different ways.
And I wanted to add also, if by me telling my story, I encourage the next LEGNA scientist for Puerto Rico, then that's a plus. So I think that also helps to encourage others that you can also get there as well.
Yeah, because in the community perspective, it's all about increasing capacity too. You know, there are limited people. I mean, lots of people deal with limited capacity. It's just kind of the world that we exist in, but especially underserved communities, there aren't many people who are doing the work in the community or are able to engage in kind of like government to government relations in some way, or work with the state, or work in policy legislation. Whenever, you know, a couple of years ago, I thought government stuff was just so over my head that it would be completely inaccessible to me in any way. And now that I've learned more and connected more with federal agencies and have learned more about them, it's tangible and real, and I can see pathways for progress. So it is also about that increasing capacity piece. It's just inspire people to get involved, especially because I didn't think that environmental work was something that I could do, was something that would be a job. I mean, science, like I said, it was just people in lab coats. I didn't think that there were a whole host and range of different kinds of jobs that you can have, even just around protecting and doing things with the environment. So communicating that and inspiring others and sharing that these are possibilities and there are options out there for that is really beneficial.
Amazing. Thank you both so much for your stories today. I'm sure we're all extremely excited and just very joyful to have you here to get to listen to you today. That's all the time we had for questions today, but we thank you so much, the panelists and the audience, for coming here today to listen to these stories and get to learn a little bit more about each of you. So thank you all. We hope to see you at the next webinar.